I'm going to go ahead and share. Hello, everybody. We're glad you're getting all signed in. This is Wendy Wilbur, State Master Gardener Volunteer Coordinator, and you have found the webinar for April 2025. And we're going to go ahead and get started right around 1 o'clock. If you would like to put anything in the chat box at this time, you're welcome to. But I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And so welcome to the webinar. And I want to let you know that we appreciate everything that you do as a Master Gardener volunteer. This is Volunteer Month. So I want to remind you that volunteers are the heart of Extension. So thank you so much for your service as a Master Gardener. And the Master Gardeners National Report came out, and it is available at the mastergardener.extension.org impacts website. But we had a wonderful 7.9 million contacts in 2024 and 5.1 million volunteer hours across the nation from Master Gardener volunteers. So you, as a group, you're doing wonderful things. So thank you for that. Remember that you can get your Master Gardener swag at the IFAS bookstore. These shirts directly support the Master Gardener program. So, and they're great polos, the canvas tote and the best hat ever, and your clings are available at the bookstore. So go check those out if you want those. You know you need a new shirt for summer. And I wanted to let you know that the registration is now open for the International Master Gardener Conference, which is being hosted by Texas A&M. And Texas chose to do this virtually. So it's a virtual conference. It's going to be in August. And I'm really hoping that you can go. It's the last week of August. So think about attending that and click on the live link for more information. So in the chat box, you all are saying where you're from, but I'm also wondering what toxic plants have you grown? And maybe you grew a toxic plant and were not aware. So if you want to pop that in the chat box, I'd be interested to know. These are a few that I have grown inadvertently. And so let me see if anyone's got anything growing here. And oh, corn plant, sago palms, yes, golden dewdrop, kunti, coral bean, gold mound lantana, kunti, rue. Yep. So up here I have oleander, oh, Brazilian pepper, sure, sago and gloriosa lily. Coleus, is coleus toxic? I don't know.
Low toxicity.
Low, okay.
If I remember correctly.
But I wanted to share with y'all, not last summer, but the summer before, I was in Mexico, and of course I had a cocktail, and they put this flower on top of the cocktail. And I looked at it and my brain said, do not drink this. And but I didn't recognize it because it was out of place, you know, floating on the ice like that. And I called the waiter over and I said, where did you get this? He said, oh, I just picked flowers from the street and we use them at the bar. And I said, this is a toxic flower. This is oleander flower. Oh, is it? He said, yeah. And I said, and if I ate this, I would become very, very ill. He's like, would you? And I'm like, yeah, I would. So you have to be knowledgeable and know what's toxic, what's not. And you also need to know that for your clients as well. Let's see. People, oh, Carolina jessamine, coral bean, pothos, plumeria, oleander, all kinds of stuff. All right. Alamanda. Okay, good. Well, Chris is going to talk to us about these and many more. So for the webinar, go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A box, and I'll monitor those and I'll toss them to Chris as we get going. And our presenter is Dr. Chris Marble. He's in the IFAS Environmental Horticulture Department. He is at the MREC in Apopka. He's a horticulturalist and an educator. He studies growth managements and weeds, invasive plant species and landscapes and ornamental plant productions. And lucky for us, he also studies toxic plants, is one of the main, is the author of the Toxic Plant App that we have through IFAS. And he also works with developing weed control in nurseries and in commercial horticulture operations. So Chris, we're so grateful that you can be here with us today. And we're just really excited for the knowledge that you're going to share with us.
Thank you very much for
So,
the introduction. You want me to go ahead and share?
yeah, I'm going to stop and you go ahead and I'm going to mute. And then in a minute, I'll hide myself.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in and for having me come speak today. So, like Wendy talked about today, I'm going to be talking about some toxic weeds, invasive plants, and then also some ornamental plants in the landscape. I'll talk about some different resources that we have, including the Toxic Plant App, but then just discuss some of the species in general in terms of which ones can be more toxic than others and how to recognize these and use these or how they can be used in the landscape and what's the importance of knowing about these. So just a few things to note. I want to make this clear. So like Wendy talked about in my introduction, I'm a weed scientist and a horticulturalist. So I'm not a toxicologist or any kind of medical professional. So if you think yourself or someone has been poisoned or a pet has been poisoned, definitely don't contact me. Contact the poison helplines and the veterinarians and medical professionals. So just to state that. Um, I became interested in this topic, so I'm a weed scientist, and so I do, of course, I'm interested in weeds and just horticultural plants in general. My wife's a veterinarian, so she was always sending me photos of plants and saying, I have a client that brought this in. Is this potentially toxic or what is this? And then they can look up the information. So, and that was becoming more frequent, and I was getting calls from other people asking me about identification of things where their pets might have eaten it or something like that, and they became concerned. So it's a need to have this type of information to where people can find it. And as far as the Florida Plant App, the Toxic Weed app or the Toxic Plant app in general. A lot of the stuff that you see online are just toxic plants in general. So some of those that we have in Florida, but in Florida, we're pretty unique in terms of the plants and things that we can grow being a tropical and subtropical environment. We have things in Florida where we don't have those same plants in a lot of other places in the United States. So what we try to do with that app is to make it very specific to Florida. So it's the plants that you would see in Florida landscapes where you might not see them in Ohio or Kentucky or Oregon or something like that. Um, but yeah, back to the plants. So not going to be able to help with medical advice and things like that, but I can definitely help with identification and management. And then I'm also not an expert on preparation of weeds and plants or foraging or anything like that, whether a plant can be eaten or not. There's a great resource and just a website, eattheweeds.com, written by author Green Dean, and he has several guides on that, and he is an expert in those types of things, and he has a newsletter that comes out. I'd recommend checking it out if that's something that you're interested in. It's really good, useful information on foraging and just identification of plants and how to prepare different plants and things like that, if that's something that you're interested in. Um, so just kind of an introduction to this topic of toxic plants. Plants are among the top 10 substances that are implicated in poisons exposure to humans. And that's just data taken from the Poison Help Center websites and things. It is low compared in comparison to the top offenders, which would be things like prescription medications and then over-the-counter medications. And I have a slide on these next couple of slides where it shows kind of the stats and where plants rank. Um, about 15,000 calls a year related to companion animal poisonings as a result of plant exposures. And then livestock is a big thing because they're outside all the time in pastures and things, and definitely toxic invasive plants and weeds can get into pastures. There's not a lot of great estimates, but it's been shown to be in the millions of dollars of estimates in terms of cost of management, and then also cost to livestock when those fatal poisonings occur in livestock situations. Um, Here's just some top human poison exposures, just to kind of put the plant toxicities into perspective. So this is from poison.org. This is their data, but you can see. So the way that this chart is, and this is their chart. I didn't create this chart, but the way that you can kind of see it is by the number of cases, and then it's color coded by the years in terms of how old the person was that was exposed. So obviously below 6 years old, that's going to be, the majority of cases. Cosmetics, personal care products is top, followed by household cleaning. Then you have things like dietary supplements, toys, foreign bodies, and things like that, pesticides, antihistamines, and then plants is right down here, about 30,000, at least from when this data was collected. So that's for humans. So plants definitely, it's a top 10 source of poisonings. But if you compare it to the top categories, which is over, 100,000 exposures, low in comparison to those. And then this is pet exposure. So number one, over-the-counter medications like ibuprofen and Tylenol and things like that. Then number two is food and drink. So one thing that's very toxic to pets, especially dogs, is xylitol, which is in sugar-free gum and things like that, and protein bars and stuff. But just food and drink, number two, prescription medications, chocolate, veterinary products like dental chews and stuff like that, and supplements. And then plants and fungi is number six on that list. Then you can see the other things that the pets could potentially be exposed to, and that's based upon percentage of the cases that were called in. So yeah, plants are definitely important, source of toxicity and poisonings and things, but low in comparison to those top categories. Um, just some background on toxic plants. So there's a long history of toxic plants, both that have been verified, through historical records and also in folklore. Socrates, for example, believed he was sentenced to death by hemlock. Nancy Lincoln is reportedly, she passed away from snake root poisoning, which was milk from cows that drank the white snake root. And then there's poison arrows and things like that you'll read about, where people have taken toxins from plants, put them on arrows, and used them for hunting and defense and things like that. Also, it's interesting, you can read some previous reports of what they call ordeal poisons. So that would basically be when someone is on trial, hundreds of years ago or whatever, they would be on trial and they would have to take a poison. And if they were innocent, they would be fine. And if they were guilty, the poison would kill them essentially. And a lot of times they use plants to do this. Some accounts and some books that I've read on the topic said that they actually ended up being correct some of the time just by chance, because if someone was innocent, they would be very confident. They would take the seed or the leaf and swallow it very quickly, and they didn't spend a lot of time chewing it and things like that. They were very confident they would be cleared because they believed, in the ordeal poison, and that it would correctly identify who's guilty and who's innocent. So they would often survive that. Whereas if someone was guilty, they would be more hesitant. They might have, spend a lot more time and consuming the ordeal poison. And then in turn, they would end up being exposed to more of the toxin essentially. Um, so just some common poisonous plant families. A lot of the ones that we talk about will fall into one of these categories. And when we're doing the plant app, you can search by plant family, and you can see that a lot of those same families come up time and time again, where certain plant families are very prone to having members of that family that are toxic. So Solanaceae or nightshades, that's things like potatoes, peppers, tomatoes. But then they also have things like nightshades and horse nettle that can be toxic. The Anacardiaceae family, so the cashew family, but also has things like poison ivy, poison oak, mangoes, cashews, and then one that we're familiar with in Florida, unfortunately, Brazilian pepper. Urticaceae, nettles, stinging nettles, and other nettles. Spurges, that's a very common landscape weed. The Euphorbiaceae family, like spurges, poinsettia, bull nettle, castor bean. The carrot family, and then bean family, also Fabaceae. So that's like things like rattlebox, hemp sensibania, creeping indigo, and all those fall into that category. So these are just a few of the plant families, but a lot of the members of these families are toxic and have toxic plants that will come up on toxic plant lists. Um, there's a lot of different ways besides being toxic that plants can be dangerous. So the ones that we're mostly going to talk about and that people are kind of interested in, and one of my interests is the ones that are poisonous if ingested or improperly prepared. But also, being a weed specialist and invasive plant specialist, plants can also be very destructive and dangerous just from habitat destruction. There's some that might not, be toxic, but they can be painful or cause injuries, like sandbur, for example. That's probably the weed that I have the most disdain for, just because that's the most common thing in my field plots here at our research center. Some can also be, allergens. There's also some plants that are considered quote unquote arsonists, where basically they are prone to drying out and they'll catch on fire and burn very hot. They can spread to other areas, and then because they burn so hot, like coconut grass, for example, it can reduce the regrowth of native plants and things like that. So a lot of different ways that plants could be dangerous. There's coconut grass, for example. You can see that if this had been, this is all this coconut grass infestation in a pine forest or pine plantation. And if that dries out, that coconut grass will be very flammable, and that fire can spread, and it can be a dangerous situation for a variety of reasons. So almost any plant, though, could potentially be toxic or cause problems. And that was one of the challenges that we found when we were trying to compile our list for these toxic plants for putting them in the app, because you see some plants and they come up repeatedly in terms of exposures and being toxic, but we wouldn't naturally always think of them as being toxic plants. So like peanuts, for example. Peanuts, I can eat peanuts all day long, but if somebody had a peanut allergy or a strawberry allergy, that can be, a fatal situation. They go into anaphylaxis, and it's a very dangerous and serious situation. And then things like cashews that people eat a lot, but those have to be prepared correctly for them to be eaten. You don't typically eat, you're not going to go and get raw cashews off of a tree and eat those. They're steamed, and that removes some of the toxin in those. But you see those examples in fruit and vegetables that we eat all the time, that they have to be prepared in a certain way to make them safe and consumable. But people have a wide range of sensitivities to different plants, especially when you're talking about plants that can be allergens and things like that. Um, but so what I'm mostly talking about are the important and common plants that are toxic to people, pets, and livestock, not related to allergic reactions and things like that. Just things that contain those toxins like ricin and things like that that are very dangerous. Again, not a medical doctor or anything like that, but can help with identification. So some, we're really familiar with. Anybody that grew up playing out in the woods and things, you hear to avoid the leaves of three, things like poison ivy, poison sumac. If you've ever run into either one of these, they can definitely give you a bad day and a bad, couple of weeks to follow, in some cases. So a lot of these, we're very familiar with, and just in their name, they're poisonous. So we tend to avoid those, whereas some of the ornamentals and things that have all this ornamental appeal, or just weeds that we see all the time, we might not ever think of those as being potentially toxic. And so those are the ones that we really need to look out for, the ones that are a little less obvious, I guess, or well known. So first, I'm going to talk about some invasive plants and quote unquote weeds. Some of these that I classify as quote unquote weeds, they might be native to the United States or native to Florida, but they typically come into landscapes and they grow where we don't want them to grow. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad plants or anything like that, but that's just what I'm classifying them as being weeds. So first, rosary pea. Um, it is a Category 1 invasive, as classified by the Florida Invasive Species Council. And so that's the highest level of invasiveness, basically. that means that it's caused, ecological damage. It's increasing its range, and it's become basically a major invasive plant. It is extremely toxic. So the toxin in this, especially in the seeds, one single seed has enough toxin to kill adult person. Birds can, and certain wildlife can eat the seeds though and be unaffected. But that's one to be familiar with. It's pretty showy. That's one that's in the Fabaceae family again. You'll see it mostly in Central and South Florida because it's not going to survive much further north of that. But that's one to be familiar with. And for all of these, you can look up in the Florida Plant Atlas. You can just Google Florida Plant Atlas, type in the scientific name there, and you can see the range, at least where specimens have been collected and vouchered. And you can see kind of where all these species are throughout the state. China berry. So this is one that's really throughout a lot of the Southeast, and you see it in Florida a lot. It's a category 2 invasive, so it's not that top quite category 1, but it is an invasive plant, definitely weedy. Was used to be a very popular ornamental plant, and people plant it a lot because it's a fast-growing tree and is attractive. You can see it has showy flowers and fruit when it's in flower, and it's an attractive tree. It has a lot of problems besides being invasive. It's not very strong or not very resistant to wind. So when we would have hurricanes and things, they'll snap off, and you'll often see these broken off in half. But it's very toxic to pets and children, especially the berries. That's the most toxic part. And when you're talking about children and pets, the berries are probably going to be the thing that they're going to be drawn to and put in their mouth and everything. So that's one to be familiar with, and probably is going to need to be removed from most situations just because of its invasive potential. A China berry lookalike is the Florida soapberry. That's a native plant, and that's a really attractive tree. It's one of those native plants that's kind of underutilized. You don't really see it for sale very much. It's not widely available, but it is a cool, small native tree. It has very similar looking fruit. But it's also poisonous, but it doesn't cause the ecological problems, and it's not going to spread and get out of hand like a China berry would. Brazilian pepper. So that's one to be familiar with. That's another one like China berry that should be removed just because of its invasive potential. But that's a noxious invasive tree. That's a category 1, highly invasive. Another one in the Anacardidaceae family. So it can cause a couple different things where China berry is going to mostly cause an issue if it's ingested. With Brazilian pepper, it can cause dermatitis. It's in the same family as poison ivy and poison oak, and it depends upon the person what kind of reaction they'll have to it. But it can cause dermatitis, and then also the berries and things will be poisonous also. The latest estimates that I could see were 700,000 acres that were infested with Brazilian pepper in Florida. So it's really widespread and a really difficult to manage invasive plant. We have a lot of weed scientists that are working on ways to manage and find better ways to control Brazilian pepper. And it's probably one that I would consider to be more sinister, or at least cause more problems as an invasive plant, as opposed to it being toxic. Creeping indigo. This is a very small, kind of inconspicuous weed. You might see this in your lawn or garden. We have them in the lawn at our research center pretty commonly. It's another one that's in the bean family. It's not that big of an issue in landscapes, at least from a toxicity standpoint, but people that have livestock, or especially horses, this is one to know and to be familiar with. And most horse owners are going to be very familiar with this plant because it can cause a lot of pretty severe damage to the livestock if they ingest this. You can have high heartbeat, respiratory rates, foaming at the mouth, light sensitivity, and ulcers in their mouth and things. There's a good EDIS article on that that's available at that link that talks a lot about this in terms of identification and management in pastures. Nightshades, I didn't include just a specific species in here, but this could be several of the different nightshade families. They're all pretty similar in appearance. And it's the Solanum species, and just about all of these are toxic. They're typically, a lot of these are native to Florida, some are annuals. A lot of the nightshades are toxic. The green fruits that you can see down here in the bottom of the slide. First, I'll point this out. The flowers are pretty distinctive, where you have the five petals, the yellow in the center, but the green fruits are especially poisonous. And then they turn this ripe color, and then it loses a little bit of its toxicity, but they can still be dangerous. There has been verified deaths from people ingesting this, but it's a very common weed in landscapes, and it's one that you see in planting beds and in turf grass even all the time. So it's one to be familiar with. Pokeweed. Native to Florida, another one of our native plants. It's a herbaceous perennial. Pokeweed can get very large if it's, if you just let it get that large. You typically don't see it that large, but it can grow 8 to 10 feet tall. It has purple stems in the roots, which are the most toxic parts. The berries, when it produces the dark red berries, that's probably what people are drawn to, children or whatever, that will go and get those and put them into their mouth. The young plants, when they're young, before they get, I would say a little bit woody, but they can be eaten if they're prepared properly. And so that's basically boiling them, draining the water, boiling them again. And so that's where the name poke salad comes from. And people, especially in the southeastern United States, used to eat poke salad all the time. Not probably a great idea unless you're very, very experienced and know how to do that, because it is a pretty in-depth preparation process to make this a safe plant. But it is one that you'll see on roadsides and things like that, and it's a toxic plant. So that's just some of the weeds, definitely not an all complete list. But here's some ornamentals and house plants that are very common. So daylilies and most lilies. So that includes several different plants in different genus groups. So Hemerocallis, Lilium, other genuses. Basically, the things that have lily as part of the common name, you can pretty much assume that it's going to be toxic to cats at least. But things like daylily, spider lily, calla lily, Easter lily, a lot of these, you might see them in the landscape, or they might be in cut flower arrangements and things. But cats especially are very sensitive to plants in this family. And so those are some to be aware of, especially if you're using them as cut flowers and bringing them inside the home, where a lot of the cats are going to be if the cat attacks them. So peace lily. So people also call these spath lilies or spathiphyllum. So it's not technically a lily, but it's one of the more common sources of plant poisonings, just because these are indoor plants, and they're great indoor plants. They do very good inside the home, low maintenance, very attractive plants. So it's not that they're a lot more toxic than the others. It's just that people have, or pets have, a lot more chance to be exposed to these than some of the others. Most toxic to cats, but it can be toxic to dogs and children also if they ingest a lot of material. But it can cause skin irritation, burning of the mouth, nausea, etc. if it's ingested. Dung cane or Dieffenbachia, common house plant. In South Florida, you might, or even in Central Florida now, you might see it planted into the landscape. It's toxic to people and pets. If you were to get that into your mouth, you're probably not going to eat, or something's probably not going to eat much of it, because it causes severe irritation and burning. As soon as someone was to try to eat some of that foliage, that's where the dung cane name comes from, meaning speechlessness. Some people will have bad skin reactions too, just to the sap if they're working with this and cutting it back and things. But then some Dieffenbachia species have been used as arrow poisons, just to give you an idea of the toxicity level of these. Pothos, so common house interior plant, great interior plant. You see them in different kinds of planters and things like that. Low maintenance, always looks great. People take them out of the interior, and when we plant them out in Florida, they can become invasive. Right now, it's a category 2 invasive in Florida, so it's one that you want to keep inside the house and not plant out in the landscape. But similar to the others, it can cause a range of symptoms if it's ingested. burning of the mouth and throat, digestive symptoms and things. But it's you probably, the chances of being exposed are probably more from the plants that are inside the home versus outside the home. But when it's placed outside the home, you have the invasive potential. Sago palm, so Cycas revoluta. So that's another common one. You see this in landscapes all the time, really throughout Florida. All parts are highly poisonous. This is one that we see or we hear a lot of dog poisonings from because they'll eat the seeds, the fruit, the nuts. That's the most toxic and the easiest to ingest, especially for dogs, which is where you see most of the problems. They can be toxic to people as well. But also other cycads, so things like kuntis, which are great native shrubs to keep around, but they can also be toxic if consumed. So those are some. I'm not saying not to use them in the landscape, but just to be aware of that. And if you have dogs and things, try to keep them away, especially if you have fruit and nuts on the tree or on the ground. This is one that people are very familiar with, and you see this all the time in Florida. One of the showiest shrubs probably on the list, Nerium oleander, also one of the most toxic. Very common landscape and ornamental throughout Florida. Very easy maintenance, great flowering. You see them on, planted along highways and things because you have that pop of color that's there, and they don't require a lot of extra maintenance. Very drought tolerant once it's established, but the plant is extremely toxic. Um, Used to be thought of as snake anti-venom, and people would try to take it as snake anti-venom. There's reports in several books that I've read of that, but then people will become or more poisoned with the oleander than they would the snake venom. There's legends and stories, mostly not verifiable, of campers dying after eating food that they basically took sticks and they cooked hot dogs or whatever on the sticks, and then they ate the food off the stick and then died or got very seriously ill after doing that. Even honey that's made from the nectar, if bees and things feed on this, can cause problems in some people. It's been used in attempted murders. So there's several historical accounts of that, but it's just a very toxic plant overall. And it is a showy plant. And so, if kids were to go up and take those flowers and play with them and put them in their mouth, that could be a dangerous situation. So it's one to, I'd never tell people not to use for a plant that's not invasive, not use the plant or avoid using the plant, but be very careful about where it's placed. It all goes back to right plant, right place. Um, just some other common toxic ornamentals, things like irises, caladiums. The bulbs of caladiums are toxic. Luckily, people aren't going to probably be exposed to those, but if dogs were to dig those up and things, the seeds of loquat. Loquat's a great fruit. I have loquat trees at my house, and I eat the fruit all the time, but you don't want to eat the seeds and especially chew the seeds. So that could be an issue for dogs, for example, if they were to get those berries, they're not going to know to take those seeds out, and they would probably crunch those seeds up because they're not a real hard seed, and they could swallow those and be exposed. The tea plant or Hawaiian tea plant, Nandina, Carolina jessamine. These are just some other real common plants that you see all the time that could be that are considered to be toxic. Um, just some more resources of different plants, and I'll get to the plant app here in a little bit, but Poisonous Plants in Pastures, so that's a publication by Brent Sellers and Jay Farrell, I believe. So if someone had livestock, that's a good resource to have because they go through the top maybe 20 or so different toxic plants to livestock because you have different considerations and things for livestock than you do others because they're grazing animals. So they're going to be more prone to eating those weeds and things as opposed to a dog or a cat, which is more like accidental ingestion. University of Florida Vet Med has a good website where they have some toxic plants. There's a book, Poisonous Plants and Animals of Florida and the Caribbean. That's a good one that I used a lot of these resources when I was doing the toxic plant out. Here's just a few others. Handbook of Poisonous and Injurious Plants, Toxic Plants of North America. This is another one that's a really interesting book. Wicked Plants. Amy Stewart is the author of this book. It doesn't have any photos really in it in terms of identification or anything like that, and it's not specific for Florida or the southeastern United States really, but it goes through and it gives kind of a background of a lot of these different plants. And she's the one that talks about plant quote unquote crime families and how different plants have been used throughout history to poison different things or the issues that they've caused historically from a toxicity standpoint. It's just a really interesting book to read. So if you're interested in the subject, I'd recommend picking that up. This is the Toxic Plant App, and so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today the most. I'm not going to go through all the different features and things of the app, but just talk about it a little bit. So basically, what we kind of did with the app is um, we have about 200 plants that we have information on. They're broken down to flowers and bedding plants, ground covers, herbs and vegetables. Then we have, trees and shrubs and all these weeds. For example, we have all these different categories. You can click on that, and then under each of those categories, you'll just see basically a gallery of different images. And then you can click on those if you suspect or you're trying to look up a plant to see if it's toxic. You can click on that. It'll talk about the plant, a little bit how to ID it, and then also the symptoms that you might see and whether it's toxic to people, pets, or livestock. So it's a good resource, I think, for people in Florida to have and be familiar with, and at least use it as a tool in your toolbox when you're trying to learn more about plants and especially toxic plants. So yeah, and some of the other features. You can look at thumbnails, search by plant name, look for plants that are toxic to people, pets, or livestock. For example, if you're mostly interested in things that are toxic to pets, you can just search by that and see lists of all those different things. Filter symptoms by poisoning. One thing I'll say about that though is that most of these toxins, and the same could be true for other poisons and things, gastrointestinal distress, that's going to be, a symptom on a lot of these. So, that might not be the best thing to look to search for because a lot of the symptoms are going to be the same regardless of the plant species or wherever the poison was. But anyways, you can use it if you have internet access, you can use it on your phone or the internet. But I'd encourage you to check that out. It's a free resource to have about 600 color photos. Um, Also, over the past couple of years, myself and my former PhD student, now my postdoc, have been writing a series of ES articles. We've got one on landscape plant species that are poisonous, house plants, and then one specifically to weed and invasive plants. And each of these is somewhere between, I'd say, 10 to 25 species or so that we cover. We just tried to focus on the most common ones. And we list those, and then we show a lot of pictures and then a little bit of information in terms of the range of it, how to identify it, and then the symptoms that it causes and what's the toxin that's actually causing the problem. So those are also available to you to check out as well. Um, just some final thoughts as I close it out. So a lot of our common plants, they can be dangerous if eaten, or if they're not prepared properly. You'll see some things that might be in that poison plant app that people say, oh yeah, well those are edible, but it might just be a certain part of that, or it might be a certain stage of development that's edible, or it might have to be prepared in a certain way. So we included it just to kind of cover our bases, and then we try to give details on all those different things. Also, potential toxicity, though, it shouldn't preclude the plant from being used in the landscape. Now, it's a different situation when you're talking about these invasive plants. Yeah, those aren't going to need to be used. I'm not going to recommend them. IFAS isn't going to recommend them, etc. But for these ornamentals and things that aren't causing these problems, you can still use these and they can still be part of a landscape if you just love that plant species. You just need to know so that you can take those precautions and know, this is going to be toxic to cats or my dog or children, etc. A lot of these are native. They provide other benefits, or they might be toxic to us, but for wildlife, they might be important sources of food and things. So that's something to keep in mind also. It all depends upon the situation, and again, right plant, right place for all these, and including, we think about that in terms of cultural requirements, but the same can be said for toxicity and where to use it in the landscape. A good example of that is oleander. You might not want that at a daycare center, planted where all the children are walking by it every day, or at, parts of Disney World, for example, but on a highway median or in a landscape where someone's there and they can monitor it and everything there. It's a good plant. So, difficult to verify toxicity of a lot of the different plants. So everything that we have in the plant app, it's been peer reviewed and vetted in terms of the sources and saying, yeah, this has been implicated in these different poisonings and things. But for a lot of these plant species, especially the Florida specific species, there's not a lot of scientific or peer reviewed literature detailing the toxins, and they haven't done a lot of testing on those. So difficult to verify a lot of those. If there's multiple reports or we saw it in multiple books where they reported it, we typically would include it. Again, not a great idea to go foraging unless you really know what you're doing or you're with an expert. Many symptoms are similar, like I talked a lot about before: nausea, burning of the mouth, etc. You'll see that as symptoms on a lot of these. So it can be difficult to really narrow down what the potential cause was, because a lot of different poisons, plants, and other things can cause similar symptoms. Again, I just want to stress this: don't call me if you're poisoned. I'm not going to be able to help you very much. I can tell you what poisoned you, but I'm not going to be able to help you after that, pretty much. And it doesn't mean the plant shouldn't be used. Just need the knowledge to know about them. Knowledge is key in using these plants in the most correct way possible. So with that, there's my email address. I'd be happy to answer any questions here. Then if you think of something later and you need to contact me about anything, I'm always happy to talk to master gardeners and just Floridians in general about anything weed management wise. So thank you very much for your time, and I greatly appreciate it.
Well, great, Chris. You gave us a lot to think about. We've got some good questions. I have been putting the link to the app from the FFL website for those of you who asked. And remember that folks should call the poison control hotline, 800-222-1222, if they have any, if they call into you and you're at the help desk. We're not physicians here. They're calling
Right.
a poison control line, okay? So let's go through some of these questions since you gave us some time. You didn't mention angel trumpet. I love angel trumpet, but want to talk about that toxicity there?
Very high toxicity. I've had that in previous presentations. I removed it from this presentation just because it's one of those where I guess a lot of these people are familiar with, but I don't, at least me, I don't see it as commonly used in the landscape as some of these other ones are as a weed or invasive plant, but very showy flowers. I love it as an ornamental tree. Extremely high toxicity. If you look at the app, we also rank all the plants by severity of toxicity. So it's severe, I think high, moderate, or low toxicity, where someone would have to consume a lot of it to really see symptoms. The angel's trumpet is the highest level.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. Somebody was asking or just stating, making the comment, some of these are butterfly host plants, which,
Yeah.
yeah, we do. So it's the right plant, right place.
Yeah. So that, yeah, as a butterflies will love a lot of these, but I'm not saying not to use them. They're great as butterfly plants. So
A plant that not a lot of people like this plant, but the cherry laurel as a landscape plant, it's volunteers, it's evergreen, but the females have the berries and dogs or other creatures might eat those berries. What would you say about that, Chris?
that is, yeah, that it's a that can be toxic also, and I think that's more of a concern. And again, I'm not a pasture weed specialist. Brent Sellers is the expert there, but it can cause problems with livestock too, and that's a big concern because, like you said, it comes up, very highly seeding and high germination rates, and it'll come up everywhere, and it becomes more toxic in periods of drought. So if the leaves have dried, that and maples, I believe, are similar, if I'm remembering that correctly. But they can be really toxic to livestock, especially. But yeah, it's a cool tree, large shrub, etc. But it is on the toxicity level. It's not as high as some of those other plants, though.
Yeah, and sometimes something like our black cherry or a cherry laurel will fall down in a pasture, and then, cows as they are, they're just gonna eat the whole
Right.
thing. And
Yeah.
then they get really in trouble.
Right.
What about our native coffee, the Psychotria berries? Are those toxic?
I don't believe so, but I don't know off the top of my head
Okay.
if we included that one or not.
Okay. And is oleander toxic to birds?
Believe I don't believe it is toxic to birds. I mean, I think it's mostly mammals that it's toxic to.
Okay.
Um, uh, I, I don't know off the top of my head. We didn't include birds on the in our list and everything of stuff we were looking up, but because the birds can eat a lot of these plants on this
I
list,
mean, they eat
have any problem.
poison ivy berries,
Right, right,
So,
and Virginia creeper and Brazilian pepper and everything else.
yeah.
So I would doubt that they are.
So here's a neat question from Mark. What about keeping toxic plants and weeds out of the compost pile?
I would say for weeds, it could be important. I don't think that you would have any. That's a good, interesting question. Weeds and invasive plants, I typically recommend not using, like if it's clippings and stuff, but that's not really from a toxicity standpoint, it's from a spread standpoint. A
Mm.
lot of the seeds and things can survive composting. Not a good idea from that standpoint. But I don't know if you would have, um, I wouldn't think you'd have many issues with compost, if it's fully composted, using that in gardens and things like that, and any kind of toxins getting anywhere. But I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay. Claudia, who's a bird person, said that Nandina is toxic to cedar waxwings because they eat so many.
Oh, okay.
And they're the kind of bird that eats so many that they can get intoxicated, actually, if they could become ripe. Um, what are your thoughts on recommending Carolina jessamine in relationship to the toxicity to bees?
Toxicity to bees.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's, I mean, I don't know if it's toxic to bees or not. I mean,
Yeah, I think they say it is. Well, that's a question for
okay.
our bee expert.
Yeah,
So
that's a good bee person
Nancy, we'll throw
question.
that to Amy someday, or you can contact her. Okay, here's a good question on the chaya. The nettle families, the
Hmm.
Opculus. So Janice said she did not see chaya. She has eaten raw chaya and has never been so sick from food poisoning in her life. Partner also tried a tiny bite and got really sick. But she understands it could be cooked, rinsed, cooked, kind of like pokeberry. But if you is chaya on your list?
That I don't think we had that on the app, at least off the top of my head. There was
Okay.
about 200, over 200, close to
Sure.
250 plants on there. So
Mhm.
I don't remember all of them off the top of my head.
So that's one that needs to be cooked, and also cassava
Hmm.
has to be cooked in order. So Janice, cassava has to be cooked in order to be consumed. Otherwise, it's toxic, right? And Flora says she was surprised by the amount of houseplants like Dieffenbachia, and the pothos because they just are, always in people's homes. So, do you want to say anything about that, Chris?
Yeah, they're great house plants. The pothos has the invasive potential and everything. I think that, I mean, if they're in an office building or something like that, and you see these big walls and things, nobody's going to really have a chance to go up there and put those in their mouth and consume a lot of them to cause problems. So, like I said, it's not something to preclude them from being used indoors. But if you're using it as a house plant inside, and you have kids that want to put, toddlers and things that put stuff in their mouth, keep them out of reach of that. So,
Yeah. Now some of these have medicinal properties, right?
oh, 100%, yes.
So it's not the poison, it's the dose, I guess.
Exactly, yeah. And some of them, I mean, even some of the ones that we include as being toxic, if you read a lot about them and you can look up peer-reviewed research on them, a lot of them have been either extracts or different preparations from the plant are used in different plant medicines. That's a whole nother area to go into and definitely not my area of expertise or anything like that. Interesting stuff. A lot of the plants, a lot of the weed seeds we actually use for research, we will purchase some of those from medicinal plant sites because a lot of the plants that we think of as being weeds, in an agricultural situation, have very high medicinal values, for whatever element it is.
Um, and remember, as master gardeners, we're not talking to people about medicine and,
Yeah.
anything that isn't like a traditional edible. Be real cautious about those recommendations.
Yeah, I'm not going to recommend anybody take any kind of supplement or herb or anything like that. So
No.
that's not my area.
Well, Chris, here is one of your favorite questions. How could you get rid of Brazilian pepper for good, as far as treating it for as a weed?
So there, I mean, so there's we have a whole EDIS article on it. We have a couple of experts that have done a lot of work. Brent Seller, Stephen Inlow has done a lot of work. So different hack and squirt treatments with several different herbicides will work. The problem typically that people run into, especially in landscape type situations, is well, and natural areas as well. You control the trees that are there. You can cut those down, do a cut stump treatment or something like that. But you're going to have that seed recruitment that's going to keep coming back until that seed bank is depleted. And so it's basically just staying on top of that and not letting it become reestablished. That's easier said than done, but that's basically the strategy. You see that with a lot of these invasive trees where you can kill the main tree, but then for several years after the fact, you're going to have those seed that continue to germinate and pop up.
Okay. Do you have a real good source for information about the about toxic mushrooms and fungi, and were any of those included in the app?
No, we didn't include any mushrooms or fungi or anything. First of all, I'm not going to be good at identifying those myself, so I couldn't tell you, what's correct or not. And then as far as resources, I'm sure there's good resources out there. I'm just not familiar with any. So we didn't delve into mushrooms.
Okay.
That can get hairy real quick if you're talking about edible versus non-edible mushrooms, and a lot of those look pretty similar, at least to me. So
Okay. Okay. Um, Basim is asking about daylilies, about their toxicity.
yeah, it's mostly toxic to cats. I believe the root is the most toxic part, which cats are probably not going to ever be exposed to. But if they were to eat flowers or chew on it or something like that, they can be poisoned. But cats and dogs are the ones that it's typically the most toxic to. Definitely cats. So all those lily plants are real toxic to cats. Easter lilies, I believe, if I'm remembering the stats correctly, was the one that was implicated the most poisonings to cats, but it's because it's used in a lot of these cut flower arrangements and things for holidays and Mother's Day and stuff like that. So it's brought into the house and sitting there where a cat might be more prone to going after it as opposed to being in a yard with daylilies planted around a tree or something.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And before we got on, I was telling Chris that the guy at Trader Joe's didn't want to sell me a bouquet of lilies because he knows I have a cat. So, but he was looking out for me, which I appreciate. Yvonne, mentioned that the oleander moth, because it's consumed all of the oleander leaves, that moth itself is toxic should a cat or a small dog start messing with that and eating it, and get maybe the hairs of the larva can get lodged in the animal's soft tissues and cause issues for puppies and cats.
Oh,
So
that's interesting. Yeah.
I
There's a
make
there's a I didn't know. I didn't know that either. There's a I think it's called the African crested rat or something like that, which basically it goes around and it has hairs on it that it will basically absorb the sap from I forget what the genus of the plant is, but people will call it's one of those poison arrow plants essentially. And so the predators won't eat the rat because if they eat the rat, they'll be poisoned by the plant
mm,
poison.
oh, good, good. Do you know if Sansevieria is toxic? The mudflap's tongue?
Yes, it can be actually invasive a little bit as well. It's much more slow than some of these others, but I believe that it is toxic also, but it's not high on that. But I think we did have that in the plant app.
Good. Stephanie checked on the native coffee, the psychotria, and she said they're edible and non-toxic, but don't have any caffeine. So that's good to
Okay.
know. Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate that. And Alfreda remembers 40 years ago, a family in the Dade County area died from using the oleander twigs and branches in their barbecue. So that happened. And then I remember, Chris, this may not be outside of your realm, a gentleman who collected the China berries off of a golf course in Orlando. He consumed them and died because he ate so many of them, but he also shipped them back to Ohio or Indiana where he was from and sent them to friends, and they were able to intercept them before
Oh, wow.
the friends consumed them. But he was just like in heaven on the golf course eating all these China berries and ended up dead. So
Yeah. Of course, I've never eaten one. I wonder if they, I mean, I guess they must taste good if people can eat a bunch of them. So,
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, Holly, we know Carolina Jessamine is a good native, so we're good on that. Now, Rita, she has eaten a daylily blossom omelet. Yes, and I have too. And I've eaten one where they took the bud and actually fried it, and it tasted like a piece of fried asparagus. It was great. But Chris and I were talking earlier, and Chris seems to think that that has a lot to do with that preparation. So, Chris, if you want to talk about that.
yeah, I believe that's the case. If it's cooked, prepared in some way, it can be safe. But again, they're most toxic to cats is the big reason that we include them as being, highly toxic or whatever on the plant app is because of its toxicity to cats. So
Okay, good. I like cats, so. Um, and Flora says she generally steers clear of any plant with milky sap. So
yeah,
are many milky sap plants poisonous? Kind of is a pretty good rule of thumb, but also lettuce has milky sap. So,
yeah.
you
And a
know,
lot of those, like the Euphorbiaceae and things, like it's not that, like, they could be considered, some of those in that group could be considered quote unquote toxic, but you'd have to eat so much that it would, they're not going to taste good. But yeah, most of that's a good rule of thumb, I guess. So
yeah. Um, so Janice wanted to mention that monarch caterpillars eat milkweed to become toxic, sort of like that rat you were talking about.
yeah,
But her question is milkweed toxic to humans?
I believe so. Yeah,
Yeah, yep. I think so. I think so. Apocinaceae, or I guess
yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's Apocinaceae. All right. Well, everyone is saying how great the presentation was, so we thank you. Someone asked me about the awards of excellence, and the call for the awards usually goes out in the summer, the year we're having the conference. So we're not having the conference in 25, we'll be having it in 26. So any word on poison wood? Um, poison wood, oh my gosh, that was the most terrible reaction I've ever had in my life down in South Florida. Um, is there a lot of problems with poison wood in pets, Chris?
Not, I mean, it's mostly in people that I've heard, not necessarily pets. So
Gosh, I was a welt from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet.
wow.
It was really bad. All right. Well, everyone really appreciated it, Chris. And if you have
Yeah.
any questions about poison or toxic plants, Chris did put his email up there, but you can find him. And then the app can be accessed from the Florida Friendly Landscaping website. And yeah, stay clear of the toxic plants, everybody. But Chris, appreciate it so much. Thank you for taking your time.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.